Tonight, we drift quietly through the corridors of time. There is no hurry, no expectation, only the gentle rhythm of thought and the stillness that comes when the world has gone to sleep. Time stretches before us like a calm river, its surface smooth, its current unhurried. We will let it carry us. Past empires and oceans, past centuries that breathed and faded like sighs. Our path is not a line but a circle, a soft loop that connects every soul that has ever lived. In this slow unfolding, we will visit 4 places of memory. Each one holds a quiet lesson, spoken not in words of triumph or despair, but in the steady tone of life continuing. The first is a palace growing dim with age, where a queen stands alone beneath the heavy air of twilight. Her crown has dulled, her hands are thin. Around her, the walls remember laughter that has long since faded. Her story is not one of glory, but of acceptance, the still moment between power and silence. The second place is far from marble halls. It lies in the deep warmth of the earth, where small seeds grow beneath leaves wide and green. From these seeds comes a taste the world will never forget, a bitterness that became sweetness. It is the story of cacao, of patience, of hands that cultivated, harvested, and transformed. It reminds us that change does not shout. It hums softly beneath the surface, waiting for its time to rise. The third story moves along a path of dust and cold rain. Here, a people walk together through sorrow. They do not hurry, for there is nowhere left to go. They walk because they must, because the earth beneath their feet still calls their name. It is a story of endurance, of footsteps that leave behind more than pain. It tells us that history is not only written in books, but in the quiet marks left on the land by those who have carried loss with dignity. And then we come to a small village beneath grey skies, where fear once filled the air like smoke. Voices trembled, hearts turned against one another. Here, belief and doubt met in a moment of confusion, and reason fell silent. Yet, even in this darkness, there remained a lesson. That peace begins not in judgment, but in the courage to listen. These 4 places, a palace, a forest, a road, a village, were bound together by something gentle and unchanging, the human wish to understand. Every life, every memory, every joy and mistake flows into the same quiet current of time. As we move through these stories tonight, we will not chase answers. We will simply observe, as though standing at the edge of a calm sea, watching the water drift toward the horizon. Each wave, each ripple carries something forward. A name, a thought, a fragment of light. Perhaps in listening, you will sense how the past still breathes within the present. Perhaps you will hear the echo of lives once lived in the rhythm of your own breath. The world has always whispered in this way, gently, endlessly. Its voice neither loud nor soft, but constant. So let the night open around you. Let the mind grow still. The sound of your breath becomes the turning of the world. Every inhale is a beginning, every exhale a remembering. We will travel without motion and return without leaving. We will step softly through centuries, not to seek wonder, but to feel the quiet shape of time itself. And when morning comes, you may not recall every word, but the calm will remain. A small thread connecting you to all who have lived, to all who will live after. Now close your eyes. Listen to the space between heartbeats. In that space, history is waiting, and time, patient as always, begins to speak. The death of Queen Elizabeth I, 1558 to 1603. Soft rain falls against the old stone walls of a castle. Each drop carries the hush of time, a rhythm that has repeated for centuries, patient, unchanging, almost forgotten. In that sound, the world seems to slow. The air feels cool, and the stones beneath the rain remember. They remember footsteps that once echoed through long corridors, voices that once filled great halls, and the weight of silence that follows after power fades. The night stretches wide, but gently. There is no fear in it, only stillness.
It is the kind of quiet that belongs to memory. The space between one breath and the next, between the life that was and the story that remains.
Somewhere within this stillness stands a figure, a queen once known across the world. Her name has been spoken in many tongues, and yet here it is only a whisper, carried by rain. She was born to both power and loss, to a world that demanded strength before tenderness, decision before rest. This is where her story begins again, not with fanfare, not with triumph, but with the soft murmur of weather upon stone. It is the sound of remembrance, the sound of a life that once moved nations, and now moves quietly through the corridors of time. As you listen, let the rhythm of the rain become your own. Let it slow the mind,
letting thoughts settle like dust on an empty floor.
There is nothing to chase, nothing to solve, only to hear and to follow the faint outline of history as it rises through the mist. The castle stands unchanged.
The walls breathe with memory.
And within that breath, we begin to walk back into another age, toward the woman who became a symbol, toward the quiet that crowns her story. The rain continues, soft and endless, and time opens its first page. Birth and lineage, the child of power and tragedy. In the quiet years of the 16th century, a child was born beneath the restless skies of England. Her name was Elizabeth Tudor. She entered a world already heavy with expectation, a world shaped by her father's will and her mother's fate. Her father, Henry VIII, was a king of bold desire, a man who bent the realm to his choices. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, bright and sharp, rose swiftly in his court and fell even faster beneath the weight of politics and rumour. From that union of strength and danger, Elizabeth came into being, neither curse nor promise, but something quiet and uncertain. When she was still small, her mother was taken from her, and the castle walls that once guarded her turned cold. She learned early how quickly love could vanish, how easily fortune could shift its face. Her childhood became a study in silence, listening, waiting, observing the movements of others, the tone of voices, the change of seasons.
Books became her refuge, language her companion.
She read not for pleasure alone, but for understanding, to make sense of the fragile order that surrounded her. Years passed, and the tides of power moved again. Her half-sister, Mary Tudor, took the throne and saw in Elizabeth not a sister, but a threat. For a time, Elizabeth was imprisoned within the tower, ancient stones pressing close, their air heavy with the memory of those who had never left. Yet even there, she did not despair.
She learned the patience of still water, the strength of waiting.
From those years of shadow, she carried away lessons that would never leave her, that power must be balanced by restraint,
that trust must be weighed like gold,
and that silence can be a kind of armor. So when the doors of the tower opened and the light returned, Elizabeth stepped out quietly, not as a prisoner released, but as a woman tempered. A mind shaped by caution, a spirit trained by solitude, and a destiny waiting in the calm beyond fear. The rise to power, 1558, a new dawn. The year was 1558. Winter mist hung over the Thames and the sound of bells drifted across London, slow, deliberate, echoing through the grey air. Each toll carried news that the kingdom had changed hands once more. Queen Mary was gone, and her half-sister Elizabeth now stood at the edge of a new beginning. She was 25 years old, calm, slender, watchful. Her eyes held the quiet steadiness of someone who had already seen how fragile crowns could be. The realm she inherited was weary, its people divided by faith, its coffers thin, its hope uncertain. But in that uncertainty, Elizabeth brought something rare, not fire or fury, but composure. She moved through the corridors of Whitehall with measured grace, her voice clear but never raised. Those around her sensed that she carried an inner stillness, the kind that gathers strength from silence. When she spoke of her reign, she promised balance, between Catholic and Protestant, between power and mercy. She spoke of peace as something not to be demanded but carefully restored. Her coronation came with the soft brightness of early light. In Westminster Abbey, shafts of colour fell through high-stained glass, touching her face with gold and rose. She wore white, a symbol of renewal. As the crown was placed upon her head, she did not weep or smile, but breathed slowly, deeply, as if meeting her own fate with acceptance. Outside, the bells continued. They rang not in triumph, but in awakening. And beneath their sound, England exhaled, a quiet sigh at the dawn of a long, steady reign. The age of radiance, England's golden years. The years unfolded gently beneath Elizabeth's steady hand. For 44 seasons of rule, England lived under a balance both delicate and deliberate. Each decision she made seemed to rest on a quiet line between two worlds, between the old faith and the new, between the sword and the olive branch, between compassion and command. In council, she listened more than she spoke. Her words came slowly, measured, as if each one were weighed before being released. Those who served her learned the rhythm of her calm, a discipline that softened haste and turned argument into order. In her presence, the air felt composed, collected. It was said that she ruled with the stillness of a candle that never flickers, no matter how the wind might stir. They called her the Virgin Queen. To others, it was a symbol of restraint. To Elizabeth, it was a vow. She had seen what marriage could do to crowns, how alliances made for love or power could divide a realm. So she bound herself not to a man, but to her kingdom. Her devotion became the shape of her reign, a constant, unbroken thread woven through years of change. During those decades, England brightened. Poets found their voices in London's narrow streets, their words drifting beyond the stage and into memory. William Shakespeare wrote of kings and fools, of loss and wonder. And the people listened, discovering themselves within his lines. Across the sea, ships carried English sails into distant waters. Francis Drake circled the world. Walter Raleigh traced new coasts, they returned with stories and treasures,
But more than that, they brought a sense that the world was vast.
and that England, small yet certain, had found its place upon it. Trade grew, art flourished, and learning spread quietly through towns and courts. The realm, once uncertain, began to stand taller, its confidence built not on conquest alone, but on imagination. It was an age of curiosity, of minds reaching outward, of hearts learning that exploration was also a kind of faith. Through it all, Elizabeth remained the calm center of the turning world. Her face, pale beneath layers of white powder, seemed untouched by time. Eyes steady, posture composed, she appeared not as a woman growing older, but as an emblem of endurance itself. In paintings, she gazed directly ahead, her expression neither stern nor kind, only serene, as if aware that history was already watching. People came to see in her something larger than rule, a quiet assurance that stability could be beautiful. Even as storms gathered beyond her shores, the realm beneath her crown glowed with a tranquil light. It would later be called the Golden Age, but in her lifetime it was simply the long hush of peace. A balance held steady by the will of one woman whose silence often spoke louder than the thunder of kings. The waning light, the slow decline. By the closing years of the 1590s, the rhythm of time had grown slower in the great halls of England. The air no longer carried the same music, and the laughter that once filled the court had softened into echoes. Queen Elizabeth, now an older woman, walked through her palaces with the measured grace of someone who had learned to move with the weight of memory. Age had begun to leave its quiet marks upon her. Her once bright hair thinned and turned pale, her teeth caused her pain, and beneath the layers of fine powder, her skin revealed the years that no crown could hide. Still she kept her posture straight, her steps precise. She knew that even as her strength faded, the image of her steadiness must remain. Around her, the court was no longer the one she had known. Old friends and trusted counselors had passed away. New faces entered the royal chambers, eager, ambitious, respectful, yet distant. The warmth of companionship that once surrounded her had grown thin, and in its place was a quiet formality, polite but cold. In those years, one presence still drew her out of solitude: Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. He was young, bold, and impatient, a reminder of what she herself had once been. His energy amused her, his defiance intrigued her. With him, she could almost forget the long shadows of age. But time tests all bonds. Essex's pride led him toward rebellion, and when his attempt to seize power failed, the law demanded justice. Elizabeth signed the warrant herself, her hand steady though her heart wavered. When the deed was done, she withdrew into silence. After his death, she spoke little of him. Yet those who served her noticed the change, a dimming of her gaze, a heaviness in her stillness. She no longer cared for music or counsel. Her appetite faded, and her days passed in quiet reflection. The glow that had once illuminated her reign had begun to recede. The court, the kingdom, even the light of day seemed gentler around her now, as though the world itself were preparing for her departure, lowering its voice in reverence as the long twilight of her rule began. The silence of the Queen, her final withdrawal. The palace grew quieter as the seasons turned. The corridors that had once carried music and conversation now held only the sound of footsteps, soft, measured, and rare. After the death of the Earl of Essex, Queen Elizabeth no longer sought the company of others. She moved through her rooms as though walking through a dream, where the air itself seemed hesitant to stir. She began to refuse food, taking only small sips of water when urged by her attendants. Sleep came to her less and less, and when it did, it was brief, shallow, and restless. Most nights she would not lie down at all.
Instead, she stood for hours, motionless, her gaze fixed on the shadows at the edge of the firelight.
To those who served her, she appeared suspended between wakefulness and something beyond it, as if her body remained in the room, but her thoughts had already begun to move elsewhere. The palace followed her stillness. Voices lowered, footsteps softened,
and a slow unease spread through the court.
None dared to disturb her. They waited quietly, day after day, unsure whether their queen would speak, or eat, or rest again. It was said that even the wind through the palace gardens seemed to hush itself in her presence. When her counselors asked if she would take to her bed, she shook her head. "I have no desire to live," she said softly. "Yet I'm not afraid to die."
Her words fell without weight, not sorrowful, not defiant.
Simply a truth spoken by someone who had already accepted the turning of time. The days blended into one another. Light and shadow passed over the walls, but within, nothing seemed to change. Her attendants kept watch through the nights, listening for movement that never came. It was as if the whole palace had entered a single breath, a long, quiet pause before the inevitable. In that stillness, England waited with her. No decree was signed, no festival held. Life, for a moment, stood beside death in perfect balance. And within that silence, the last sovereign of the Tudor line prepared, calmly and without fear, to let the world continue without her. March 24th, 1603. The passing of the Queen. By the early months of 1603, the long reign of Queen Elizabeth had grown quiet. She had withdrawn to Richmond Palace, a place of soft light and gentle air beside the Thames. The days passed in near silence. Her attendants moved carefully through the corridors, speaking in whispers, as though even their words might disturb the stillness that surrounded her. Her body had grown weak. The firmness of her step was gone. Her voice had become a whisper. At last, she allowed herself to rest upon her bed, her frame small against the wide linen sheets. Illness had settled over her gradually. Not sudden, not fierce, but steady, patient, like the quiet dimming of a flame. Outside, winter was giving way to spring. The morning of March 24th came without wind. The air was pale and unmoving. Candles burned low beside her, their light thin and wavering, casting slow patterns upon the walls. No one spoke. The palace seemed to listen. Those who watched over her could not agree on what had taken her strength. Some said it was age and sorrow, the weight of years pressing gently down until her body could no longer rise. Others whispered of the white powder, the Venetian ceruse, which she had worn faithfully for decades to preserve her image. Its lead, they said, slowly seeping into her blood. A few believed it was a hidden illness, a quiet malady of the lungs or heart that time itself had chosen not to reveal. But in the end, such reasons mattered little. Her breathing grew light, her eyes half open, watching something beyond the ceiling, beyond the moment. Her attendants knelt nearby, some in prayer, others only waiting. There was no struggle, no cry. Her final breath passed as softly as the extinguishing of a candle, a faint sigh that blended with the silence of the room. And then it was done. The long reign had ended. The woman who had carried a nation's fate in her hands was gone. Outside, the river continued to move,
slow and sure, carrying the reflection of a grey sky.
Within the palace, the flame of England's golden age faded into calm, a quiet end to a long and steady light. The afterglow, her legacy. When Queen Elizabeth passed from this world, the long story of the Tudor dynasty came gently to its close. The crown passed to James of Scotland, and a new age, the Stuart line, began.
Yet even as power changed hands, the presence of Elizabeth did not fade.
It lingered quietly, like the soft light that remains after sunset, a calm reminder of what her years had shaped. Her reign had given England something that could not be replaced, a sense of itself. Through the calm of her leadership, the patience of her rule, and the balance she kept between faiths and nations, the country had learned to stand steady on its own. In the years that followed, her name continued to echo. In poems and plays, in songs and speeches, in the way her people spoke of courage and restraint, writers like Shakespeare had flourished under her light, and through their words, her age became eternal. It was an era not defined by conquest, but by thought, by art, by the quiet confidence of a nation that had found its voice. They called it the Elizabethan era, a golden chapter where the seas opened wide, where discovery, music and language intertwined. It was a time when England began to look outward, and yet, at its heart, remained shaped by the stillness of a single woman's rule. Centuries have passed and her image endures. The pale face, the composed gaze, the symbol of endurance and intellect. She remains not only a queen remembered, but a presence that softened the march of history, leaving behind a glow that, even now, it has never truly faded. Opening atmosphere, the whisper of the tropics. The sound of grinding stone begins, slow, rhythmic, ancient. Beyond it, the faint chorus of insects hums beneath a canopy of leaves. The night air is warm and damp, heavy with the scent of earth and rain. Somewhere far away, a river moves unseen, its water gliding over smooth stones. This is where the story begins. Not in a palace or a court, but deep within the rainforests of Central America, where time itself seems to breathe slower. The trees rise tall and close, their roots spreading through dark soil rich with life. The air is alive with whispering things. The flutter of wings, the sigh of branches, the hush of wind that moves like a quiet spirit through the leaves. Moonlight filters through the canopy, silver and soft, touching the surface of small fruits that grow close to the trunk. Pods shaped like hearts, glistening with the memory of rain. The people of this land call the tree sacred. They do not speak of it with ownership, but with reverence. They know it as something given, not made. A bridge between the living world and the unseen. When they walk among its roots, they move slowly, for even the ground feels holy. The night deepens. The grinding continues, gentle and steady, as though the earth itself were turning something precious in its hands. The air carries the scent of roasted beans, sharp and earthy, a promise of what will one day become sweetness. Here, before sugar, before trade, before memory itself, the story of chocolate begins. In the rhythm of stone and seed, in the breath of the forest that never sleeps, the sacred tree, birth of cacao. Deep within the warm heart of the forest, there grows a tree unlike any other. Its trunk is slender, its bark smooth, its roots curling quietly through dark, damp soil. From its branches hang pods the color of sunset, red, gold, and rust, each one carrying the secret that would one day travel the world. This is the cacao tree, the sacred gift of the tropics. Long before sweetness touched the tongue, the people of these ancient lands already knew its power. They did not plant it in neat rows or call it by a name of ownership. Instead, they spoke of it as something holy, a gift from the gods, a spirit that nourished both body and soul. The Olmec, among the first to walk these forests, were said to have gathered its fruit and whispered prayers before breaking the pods open. To them, cacao was not merely food, but a sign of life itself. Centuries passed, and the Maya and Aztec peoples carried the reverence forward. They called the drink xocolotl, the bitter water. It was dark, strong, and alive with energy. They roasted the beans upon hot stones, ground them with care, and mixed the paste with water, maize, and chili. At times they added honey, not to soften the taste, but to honor the balance between heat and sweetness, earth and sky. In the flickering light of a torch, the thick drink foamed in clay cups, its surface shining like bronze. It was sipped by kings, warriors, and priests during sacred rites, a bridge between worlds, a symbol of endurance and spirit. They believed it carried divine essence, the very breath of creation, within its bitter heart. To drink cacao was to taste something more than flavor. It was to share a moment with the unseen, to remember that all things living were bound by the same pulse, the rhythm of the forest, the heartbeat of the earth. And so long before it was molded into sweetness or wrapped in paper, cacao was already a miracle. It was a seed of devotion, a small piece of the divine, born beneath the shadows of endless green. The drink of kings and warriors. In the ancient cities of stone and sunlight, the drink of cacao was not taken for pleasure. It was sacred, a ritual drawn from the heart of the earth. When the air grew still and the fires burned low, priests prepared the bitter mixture, their movements slow, deliberate, and precise. Every gesture carried meaning, every sound of grinding stone was a form of prayer. The cacao was roasted until its scent filled the air, deep, smoky, and alive. Then it was ground by hand into a dark paste, mixed with water and maize, seasoned with chili for heat, and sometimes touched with honey to honor the balance of life's contrasts. The result was not sweet, not gentle, but powerful, a liquid of strength and purpose. In temples and royal courts, clay cups were filled with this dark drink. They glowed softly in the light of the fire, the surface of the cacao shimmering like bronze beneath the flame. It was not a drink for all. Only kings, warriors, and priests were permitted to taste it, for it was believed that within its bitterness lay the spirit of vitality, the courage of battle, the wisdom of prayer, the endurance of rule. To drink cacao was to cross a threshold. Each sip was a connection between earth and sky, between the mortal and the divine. It carried the strength of the soil, the fire of the sun, and the breath of the gods who gave it life. Warriors drank before battle to awaken their spirit. Rulers drank before council to steady their hearts. and priests drank before ceremony, believing that in its darkness lay a glimpse of eternity. The cacao was not meant to comfort. It was meant to awaken, to remind those who tasted it that power and humility must walk together. In the dance of flame and shadow, as the bitter scent rose through the halls, the people believed the gods listened. Thus, in the world before sweetness, chocolate was not a treat, but a prayer in liquid form. A sacred bond between strength and spirit, between the hearts of men and the silence of heaven. Across the ocean, chocolate reaches Europe. The world turned, and the winds of exploration carried ships farther than they had ever gone before. In the 16th century, sails stretched wide against the sky, and the ocean became a road between worlds. From the warm forests of the Americas, the treasure of cacao began its long journey east. A small seed crossing vast waters, guided by chance, curiosity, and conquest. The Spanish explorers, having touched the shores of the New World, returned with stories of gold, spices, and a strange dark drink. Bitter yet invigorating, a taste unlike any other. They carried beans instead of jewels, and though they did not yet understand its spirit, they knew it was something rare. When cacao reached Europe, it entered quietly, not as a merchant's trade, but as a secret. In the courts of Spain, priests and nobles gathered in shadowed chambers to taste the foreign drink that came from across the sea. It was brewed in small cups, thick, dark, and fragrant. A mystery from lands far beyond the edge of familiar maps. The first sips were met with hesitation. The bitterness of the drink lingered on the tongue, reminding them of earth and smoke, of something untamed and powerful. To soften it, they added sugar, newly prized in Europe, then cinnamon to bring warmth, and vanilla for a breath of gentleness. With each addition, the ancient drink began to change. The fire of the jungle met the refinement of the court, and the ritual of cacao became an indulgence of the elite. In time, chocolate was whispered about in royal halls, a potion of vitality, a comfort for melancholy, a luxury known only to those close to power. It was said to inspire affection, sharpen the mind, and soothe the heart's unrest. For a while, it was a royal secret, guarded and treasured, served in gilded cups beside flickering candles, its scent mingling with silk and smoke. Beyond the palace walls, few even knew its name. But within those quiet rooms, the essence of two worlds had already begun to blend. The spirit of the new world, wild and raw, and the grace of the old, elegant and slow. From that meeting of earth and empire, a new chapter began. The sacred drink of kings and warriors had crossed the ocean, and in the hush of European courts it found a new destiny. No longer a prayer, but the beginning of pleasure. The transformation. From ritual to delight. By the dawn of the 18th century, chocolate had already traveled far from its sacred beginnings. What was once a dark ritual of kings and warriors now rested in porcelain cups across Europe. Still precious, still rare, but no longer divine. The world was changing. Steam rose not only from the drink, but from the engines of industry, and the story of cacao was about to shift once more. From ceremony to comfort, from mystery to joy. Factories began to hum in the corners of cities. Machines pressed and turned with steady rhythm, the sound of progress replacing the slow grinding of stone. Cacao beans, once crushed by hand upon rough surfaces, were now refined through steel and steam. In 1828, a Dutch chemist, Coenraad van Houten, invented a method to press the natural fat from the cacao bean.
The smooth, golden cocoa butter.
What remained could be ground into a fine, dry powder, easy to mix, easy to mold. This simple act in the separation of fat and powder transformed the nature of chocolate forever. It became lighter, gentler, more accessible. No longer a thick, bitter brew confined to royal tables, it began to flow into the hands of artisans, bakers, and dreamers. They experimented, they sweetened, they refined. In 1847, the first solid chocolate bar appeared, a creation of the Fry family in England. It was firm, yet melted upon the tongue, a small square of luxury that could be held, shared, or given. For the first time, chocolate became something one could touch. A pleasure shaped by human hands. The transformation continued. In Switzerland, a land of snow and stillness, craftsmen began to blend cacao with milk. The result was softer, smoother, its flavor warm and comforting like sunlight caught in sweetness. Daniel Peter first mixed milk with chocolate in 1875, and soon after, Rudolf Lindt perfected the process of conching, turning the rough texture into silk. The bars gleamed, the taste deepened. Chocolate was no longer a drink or a luxury. It had become an art form. Across the Atlantic, the story continued. In America, Milton Hershey, a man with humble beginnings and quiet persistence, dreamed of bringing fine chocolate to every home. By the early 20th century, his factories filled the air with the scent of sweetness. He built not just a company, but a community, a place where the making of chocolate was also the making of dreams. Names like Lindt, Cadbury, and Hershey's would come to define the next century of delight. Each bar carried not only flavor, but the essence of invention. The meeting of patience and progress,
The harmony between craft and machine.
and yet, even as chocolate spread across continents, a part of its ancient rhythm remained. Within every bar was still the memory of the forest, the echo of the grinding stone, the whisper of the sacred tree. The ritual had not vanished. It had only changed shape. Now it lived in the quiet gestures of everyday life, in the unwrapping of foil, in the pause before the first bite, in the comfort that sweetness brings to the weary heart. Chocolate became more than food. It became a symbol of affection, of kindness, of celebration.
A gift between lovers.
A token of peace after quarrel, a small promise that joy could still be found. It was given on birthdays, at weddings, in moments of farewell and reunion alike, and in every exchange it carried an unspoken message that pleasure and memory are meant to be shared. Factories grew larger, recipes multiplied, and chocolate found its place in every corner of the world. But no matter how far it traveled, its story remained rooted in balance, between bitterness and sweetness, between tradition and change, from the firelit temples of the Maya to the candlelit courts of Europe, and finally to the glowing factories of the modern age. Chocolate's journey had come full circle. It began as a sacred connection and became a human comfort.
It began as a gift of the gods and became a gift we give to one another. And so, each time a piece of chocolate melts upon the tongue,
it carries with it all the centuries before. The forests, the rituals, the inventions, the dreams. It is both ancient and new,
simple and profound.
a reminder that even in a world of constant motion, some pleasures remain timeless. In the hum of modern life, chocolate is still a quiet pause, a moment where the past and present meet, and the taste of sweetness is nothing less than the memory of the earth itself. The taste of time, a sweet legacy. The story of chocolate does not truly end. It continues each time a hand reaches for a small, wrapped square, each time foil opens with a quiet rustle, each time the first scent of cocoa rises, familiar and warm. The world has changed beyond the dreams of those who once ground the beans on stone, but the essence remains. The same dark richness, the same gentle promise of comfort. When you hold a piece of chocolate,
You hold more than sweetness.
you hold centuries. Within that single taste lies the long arc of discovery and devotion. The sacred forest where the cacao tree first grew, the temples where priests whispered prayers over steaming cups, the ships that crossed the endless ocean, the factories that turned ritual into creation.
Every flavor is a record of hands and hearts.
Of labor and longing of people who believed that something bitter could become beautiful. Chocolate has always carried two truths. It is both ancient and modern, both gift and craft. It belongs to the gods of the past and to the children of the present. It is made by science now, by machines that hum through the night, but its spirit is still touched by memory. Each bar is a bridge between the sacred and the simple, between what once was worship and what now is joy. In every culture, it finds a place. It is offered in celebration, in apology, in affection. It travels through hearts more easily than words. A small sweetness shared between two people can dissolve distance, can soften silence, can remind us that kindness has flavor. The modern world no longer bows before the cacao tree, but it still listens to what it teaches, that patience transforms rawness, that care turns labor into art, that even bitterness given time can become something tender. Perhaps that is why chocolate endures, not because it is perfect, but because it understands the imperfect, the quiet need for warmth, the comfort of something that melts instead of resists. It is not merely eaten, it is remembered.
So when the wrapper unfolds,
And the first piece rests upon your tongue, pause for a moment, feel its slow surrender to the warmth of your breath. Let the sweetness arrive without hurry, and think of the hands that shaped it, the stories it carries, the journey it continues. You taste not only sugar, but centuries of discovery and devotion, a history melted into joy. Opening soundscape, wind and memory.
the sweetness fades, and in its place comes silence.
Wide, open, endless. The sound of the forest disappears,
And a new sound takes its place.
the wind moving slowly across an empty plain. It carries the scent of dust and grass and the faint echo of footsteps far away. They come and go like waves upon the earth, a rhythm too distant to measure, too soft to name. Above, the sky stretches vast and grey, a single sheet of cloud without edge or colour. There are no trees here, no shelter.
Only the horizon unbroken and still.
In the distance, smoke rises. The last breath of a fire gone cold. It drifts upward, a thin memory dissolving into air. The land itself seems to breathe. It remembers what has passed. Voices once carried by the wind, songs now lost to time, the steady march of those who walked before. Their footprints, long faded, remain only in the whisper of the grass. This is America, in the early years of its youth. A land wide enough to hold both promise and sorrow. The wind moves through it like a witness, turning the pages of history with a patient hand. and as it passes, the faint sound of footsteps returns once more, soft and uncertain,
as though the earth itself were remembering. It is here, on this open plain,
that our next story begins. Not with triumph or discovery, but with departure. The wind continues to move, carrying with it the memory of lives uprooted and the long, quiet road. That history would come to call. The Trail of Tears. The law of removal at 1830. The wind carries us forward, across the years, to a time when the young United States stretched its hands toward the horizon. It was the year 1830, a season of ambition and expansion. The land was wide, the soil rich, and the dream of growth burned quietly in the hearts of many. In the capital, beneath the dome of government, words were written that would change the course of a continent. The document was called the Indian Removal Act, and it bore the signature of President Andrew Jackson. It promised order, opportunity, and progress. A path for settlers to move westward, a chance, they said, for a nation to flourish. But behind those words, another truth waited. The land that was to be given to some would be taken from others. Forests, rivers, and sacred hills, places older than the country itself, were marked, measured, and claimed. The paper spoke of treaties and exchange, and of fairness and necessity.
Yet to those who lived upon that soil,
It was not progress that arrived, but exile. In the halls of power, the tone was calm, the pens precise. Beyond them, in the villages and valleys of the South, rumors spread like quiet thunder. The Cherokee, the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and the Seminole heard that their lands, their homes, their graves, their songs were no longer their own. They were told they would be moved to a new place, a far land called the Indian Territory, where, it was said, they could live in peace. Some leaders pleaded. They sent letters written in careful English, asking only to remain where their ancestors slept. Others prepared quietly, knowing words would not save them. The law had already spoken. And so the promise of progress became the beginning of sorrow. What had been called negotiation became command. What had been framed as choice became compulsion. The ink on the page was dry, and with it, the fate of nations was sealed. The wind that once carried songs from the forests now carried silence. Houses were abandoned, fields left to wild grass. Families gathered what they could, tools, blankets, memories, and waited for the soldiers who would come to guide them away. In that year, 1830, a line was drawn across the map, and with it a deeper line was drawn across the heart of a people. They would follow it westward step by step, mile by mile, into a history written not in victory but in loss. The world called it removal. They would remember it as the beginning of the Trail of Tears. The people and their lands.
before the wind carried sorrow, it moved softly through lands that were full of life.
Here, long before maps and borders, people lived in rhythm with the earth itself. To the Cherokee, the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and the Seminole, the land was not a possession. It was a presence. It breathed with them. It sang with them. It held their stories in its soil. The forests were green with memory. The rivers shimmered with the reflections of ancestors. Each hill, each stone, each path had a name, and every name was a prayer. Children learned to walk by the river's edge, and their first steps were blessed by the earth beneath them. The people grew corn and beans, tended fires that never went out, and at night they told stories under stars. That felt close enough to touch. Their homes were woven from reeds and timber. Their voices carried in song across the fields. Drums echoed like the heartbeat of the land, slow and steady, never rushed. The wind turned their words into whispers, carrying them to the mountains, to the forests, to the spirits who listened from unseen places. To them, the earth was alive. It had memory and feeling and wisdom. To harm it was to harm oneself. To move from it was to lose not only home, but a part of the soul. The soil beneath their feet was the same soil that cradled their ancestors' bones, the same ground that had held their laughter and tears. Each tribe had its own language, its own stories, its own rhythm, but all shared the same reverence for balance. They lived by the cycles of the moon, by the change of the seasons, by the call of birds returning in spring. Hunting, planting, harvesting, all were done with gratitude, never greed. The land gave and they gave back. When storms came, they waited. When the rivers rose, they listened. They did not command the world. They moved within it like water around stone. To the Cherokee, the world was a great circle where life and death were not opposites, but continuations. To the Choctaw, every tree had spirit, every stream a story. The creek sang to the dawn, offering thanks for another day to walk upon sacred ground. The Seminole carried fire through the wetlands, believing it to be the breath of the Creator. And the Chickasaw, fierce and proud, saw courage not in conquest, but in standing rooted as firm as the oak. They did not speak of ownership, because the land could not be owned. It was not property, but kin an ancestor, older than memory. To cut it, to divide it, was to wound the very heart of existence. When the white men came with their maps and ink, drawing lines upon what had never been divided, the people watched in silence. They did not yet know that these lines would become walls, and these walls would one day push them away from everything they knew. But in this moment, before the sorrow began, their world was whole. The rivers still sang their old songs. The grass still bent under the same wind. That had carried their prayers for generations. Children still laughed beneath the trees, their small footprints pressed into the same soil. That had held their ancestors' steps. This was their home, not by claim, but by belonging. And even when the world around them would change, that belonging that sacred bond between people and earth, would live on quietly in the memory of the land itself. The journey, the long walk west. The time came when the law was no longer just ink on paper. Soldiers arrived at the edges of villages, their voices steady, their orders already written. The people were told to gather what they could carry: blankets, tools, seeds, small bundles of food. They were told they would travel west to a land promised as safe, fertile, and theirs forever. But forever had already been broken. The morning of departure was silent. Smoke rose from the last fires, curling softly into a grey sky. Dogs barked once and then stopped. Women tied their children close. Men turned for one last look. At the rivers, the fields, the graves of their ancestors. No one spoke. There were no words for the leaving. And then they began to walk. They walked more than 1,000 kilometers, through rain, snow, and hunger. The earth beneath their feet was cold and uneven. Winter crept slowly from the mountains, and the wind carried with it the sound of loss. Days blurred together. endless miles of mud and frost. The path wound through forest and plain, crossing rivers swollen with ice, stretching into horizons that never seemed to end. Children cried for water, the old fell behind. Mothers carried both their infants and their grief. Men built small fires at night,
Not for warmth, there was too little wood.
but to keep the darkness from swallowing everything whole. Food grew scarce. Cornmeal ran out first, then beans, then hope. The soldiers hurried them onward. There was little time to rest. Rain soaked through their clothes, snow crusted on their lashes, feet bled. Some stopped walking altogether, their bodies sinking quietly into the mud, the snow covering them by morning. The river crossings were the hardest. Water ran deep and fast, turning to ice around the edges. People clung to each other as they crossed, holding children above their heads. More than once, the current claimed them. Their names were lost, but their songs still lingered in the wind. Every step westward felt heavier than the last.
It was not only distance they carried,
But memory dash dash. The scent of pine, the sound of home, the faces of those left behind. And though the journey was forced, they tried to keep something sacred alive. At night, when the soldiers slept, some whispered old stories to the stars. Some hummed songs too quiet to be heard, so that even if they were to disappear, the song would remain. The trail stretched endlessly across the land. Those who survived the early months grew thinner, quieter, more hollow. Their eyes held not despair, but distance, a kind of stillness that comes when pain becomes too familiar to name. And yet, even here, there was care. When someone fell, others stopped to lift them. When a child cried, hands reached out to share. A drop of water, a crust of bread, a whisper of comfort. They walked together not by choice but by need. Every shared step was resistance, every breath a small act of endurance. The journey lasted months. Winter gave way to spring, but the thaw brought no relief. Disease spread through the camps. Fevers, coughs, the slow dimming of breath. The weak were carried as long as possible, then buried along the path, their graves marked only by stones and song. By the time they reached the new land,
the numbers had fallen.
more than 4,000 Cherokee had died along the way. Mothers, fathers, children, elders. Their absence hung in the air, like mist over the plains.
Those who arrived stood upon unfamiliar soil.
The rivers did not know their names. The wind smelled different here. The trees whispered in another voice. Still they built fires, they planted corn,
They spoke to the earth softly.
as if reminding it who they were. History would come to call it the Trail of Tears. But for those who walked it, it was something quieter, something the world could not quite translate. It was the breaking of one world and the fragile beginning of another. It was exile and endurance, sorrow and song, darkness and the faint shimmer of dawn. In the hush of night, the plains would fall silent again, save for the sound of the wind, moving gently over the grass. And if one listened closely, beneath that wind, beneath the long memory of the earth, one might still hear them. The faint echo of feet, the rhythm of a people walking onward, carrying with them what could not be taken. Their spirit, their stories, and the quiet strength of those who refused to vanish. The trail of tears, sorrow and survival. They called it Lunar Lullaby, the trail where they cried. The world would come to know it by another name, the Trail of Tears. But to those who walked it,
it was not only a trail.
it was the unraveling of everything once whole, the breaking of hearts,
The severing of roots.
the quiet undoing of a people's place in the world. The land behind them grew smaller each day, until it was only memory, a distant shimmer in the mind like smoke on the horizon. The land ahead remained unknown, a promise made by those who would never walk beside them. Between the two stretched silence, a long grey corridor of wind and distance. They moved through it with the weight of grief, but also with the rhythm of endurance. Step by step, breath by breath,
They carried not only their bodies,
but their history, the language of their ancestors, the songs that named the rivers and stars, the prayers whispered in tongues that would not easily fade. This was not just a journey. It was a breaking of hearts, a severing of roots. Those who survived learned to walk with the ache of remembering. They spoke softly of the ones who did not make it, of the children buried by the roadside and of the elders who lay down beneath the sky and never rose again. Their names were spoken into the wind so the earth itself might remember them. When they finally reached the western lands, the air felt strange, too dry, too quiet, as if listening for voices that would never come. Yet even here, even after all that had been taken, something within them remained unbroken. They built new homes, planted seeds in unfamiliar soil, and spoke to the ground, as they had once spoken to the forests of the east. The soil did not yet know their footsteps, but they taught it. Slowly, patiently, until the land began to listen. They rebuilt their councils and their songs. They taught their children the old words, the sounds of the rivers that had been left behind. Around the fires, elders retold the stories of the beginning, not because they had forgotten,
but because memory itself was a kind of survival.
The dances returned too. Feet moved in circles upon the earth, soft and measured, as though tracing the shape of the past. Each movement was both mourning and defiance, a declaration that the spirit could bend, but would not break. The drums began to sound again. Not loudly, but steady, like the beating of the heart of a people who still remembered who they were. In this new land, life was different. The rivers did not speak their names, but the wind learned to carry their songs. The trees grew from unfamiliar seeds, but their shade became home. And though the past followed them, like a shadow that never faded, they learned to walk beside it without being swallowed by it. Some nights when the sky turned deep, and still they looked upward to the same stars that had once hung over their old villages. Those stars were unchanged, ancient and silent, watching both the living and the lost. Beneath them, the people whispered the names of those who had gone before, a litany of remembrance, a promise never to forget. The Trail of Tears was not only a wound, it became a root. From its sorrow grew resilience, and from that resilience grew song. A quiet strength passed from one generation to the next, not shouted, but carried gently like an ember cupped in careful hands. Centuries later,
Its echo remains.
in the languages still spoken,
In the stories still told, and
in the dances still performed beneath open skies, every song that rises from Cherokee lips, every prayer in the tongues of the Creek or Choctaw, every drumbeat that calls back the ancestors, is part of that survival. The trail, though once soaked with tears, became more than a mark of sorrow. It became a testament to endurance.
to the power of memory,
to the unyielding bond between people and the earth. Though the journey began in darkness, it did not end there. From grief came grace, from exile, identity, and from silence, song. Now, when the wind moves over the plains of Oklahoma, it carries the sound of something eternal. Not the weeping of the past,
but the steady breath of a people who remain.
Their footsteps are still there, beneath the grass, beneath the centuries, woven into the rhythm of the land itself. And if you listen closely,
you may still hear them.
A distant chorus of strength and sorrow echoing through time, soft as prayer, enduring as earth. The echo of memory, reflection, and legacy.
Time moves forward, yet some footsteps never fade.
Across the vast plains and along the quiet rivers, the earth still remembers the passage of those who walked before. The wind carries their stories softly,
turning grief into remembrance,
and remembrance into wisdom. Today, the Trail of Tears stands as one of the darkest roads in human history. It is marked not by monuments of stone, but by memory, a memory written into the soil, carried by generations who refused to forget. It speaks of sorrow, yes, but also of survival. The story is not only about what was lost, it is also about what endured, the voice, the rhythm, the heart of a people who would not let silence erase them.
Languages once forbidden are still spoken,
their syllables flowing like rivers that have found new courses through time. Songs that were almost forgotten rise again in ceremonies and gatherings, their melodies blending with wind and drum, their words remembering both pain and pride. In the dances that circle the fire, feet strike the ground not in anger but in communion, a quiet honoring of those who came before and those who will come after. Children learn these steps not from books or commands, but from the steady rhythm of life itself. Each movement says, "We are still here."
The Trail of Tears, once a path of exile,
has become a path of remembrance. It winds not only through forests and fields, but through hearts and generations. For some, it is a place to mourn. For others, it is a place to listen. To the silence, to the wind, to the truth that progress built on pain can never bring peace. That is the lesson the land continues to teach. A lesson whispered through rain, through the rustling of grass, through the slow, steady pulse of the world.
It tells us that every tree remembers, that every stone holds a story,
that no nation is made stronger by the suffering of those it displaces.
And yet, in that same truth,
there is also light, because even when the world sought to take everything, something unyielding remained. Spirit cannot be removed.
It cannot be walked away from.
It lives in breath, in voice, in memory, in the languages still spoken by elders and children, in the songs that rise with dawn, praising the sun not as conqueror, but as companion, in the stories told around firelight where laughter follows sorrow and where every telling becomes an act of healing. The Trail of Tears endures not as a scar, but as a reminder.
It reminds us that history breathes, that its lessons are never distant.
It calls us to walk with gentleness, to build with care, to remember that every road we travel rests upon the ground of someone else's home. The wind continues to move over those plains. It passes through the grass,
across the rivers,
and between the trees. And though centuries have softened its sound, the wind still carries the songs of the people who once walked there. They are not gone. They live in the rhythm of the earth itself, in every whisper of wind,
in every quiet sunrise,
in every story that begins with loss and ends with endurance. Listen closely, and you may still hear them. Their footsteps move softly through the past, their voices woven into the hum of the world. A reminder that memory, like the spirit, never truly fades. Opening. Soundscape. Fire and bells. The crackle of fire is the first sound.
Slow, steady, fading into the stillness of winter.
Beyond it, church bells ring faintly in the distance, their echoes rising and falling with the wind. The air is cold and thin. Snow drifts gently between narrow wooden houses and smoke twists upward from chimneys into a grey and endless sky. This is Salem in the year 1692. A small village, a circle of light in the vastness of the New England woods. The world feels hushed, as though holding its breath before a storm. The people move quietly along the frozen paths, their voices low, their hearts wrapped in faith and fear. Candles glow behind shuttered windows. The scent of wood smoke and iron fills the air. The church stands at the center of it all, its steeple pointing toward a sky that seems too close, too heavy with silence. From its doorway comes the faint murmur of prayer, the rustle of wool and parchment,
the rhythm of a world bound tightly by belief.
Outside, the fire burns low, its light flickering over snow and stone. The sound of the bells grows softer now until it is little more than memory. Somewhere in the distance, a door closes and the wind takes its place. Moving through the streets, whispering through bare trees, carrying with it a quiet unease that no one yet understands. Here, beneath the pale winter sun, the story begins. Not with thunder or fury, but with a silence so complete that it seems almost holy. The winter of fear, Salem, 1692. Winter had settled over Salem, heavy and unbroken. The air was sharp with frost, and the fields lay sleeping beneath pale snow. Each morning began in silence, smoke rising from chimneys, the creak of wooden doors, the sound of boots against frozen ground. The world felt smaller in the cold. The nights came early and the shadows stayed long. In that winter of 1692, the stillness began to change. It started quietly in one house where the fire burned low and the walls echoed with uneasy prayer. A few young girls, daughters, nieces, children of the village, fell to the floor in strange fits.
They screamed, twisted, spoke of shapes in the dark.
They said unseen hands had touched them, that whispers had called their names. At first, the elders watched in disbelief. Doctors searched for cause, but none could be found, and so the village turned to what it knew best, the language of sin and of spirits. If no illness could explain it, then surely something else had entered Salem, something unholy. The girls began to name those they said had cursed them. One voice became two, then three. Names passed from house to house, from whispered prayer to public fear. And like a spark catching dry wood, the rumor spread. It leapt across fences through the market into the church pews where people bowed their heads and wondered if the devil had come among them.
Outside, the snow continued to fall.
Softly, endlessly, covering the ground but not the fear. That fear grew quietly, rooted in silence and faith. Every creak in the floorboards, every knock upon the door seemed to hold the weight of suspicion. Neighbors began to watch each other more closely. A glance, a gesture, a word spoken too late. Any of it could be taken as proof. Old disputes were remembered. Small jealousies took new shape. The air itself seemed to tighten as though the entire village were holding its breath. By candlelight, mothers prayed longer at night. Men spoke in low voices by the hearth. Children woke from dreams of dark shapes at the window. And above it all, the church bell tolled softly through the snow, its sound half a warning, half a plea. The winter deepened, the river froze, and with it, reason began to freeze as well. Where once there had been calm, there was only a strange and growing dread. It could not be touched,
but it could be felt everywhere. In the heart,
in the silence, in the slow spreading of a fear that no fire could keep away. The village of Salem trembled with fear, the accusations. When neighbors turned, it began quietly, almost like a rumor of the wind. A few young girls, frightened, trembling, spoke of shapes in the night, of unseen hands and voices that called to them in the dark.
They screamed and convulsed,
their eyes wide with terror,
and when asked what tormented them,
they said it was witchcraft. It began with young girls who screamed, convulsed, and claimed they were cursed by witches. At first, the villagers tried to comfort them. They prayed, they whispered scripture, they brought candles and herbs to drive away the unseen, but the fits did not stop. Instead, they grew louder, spreading from one house to another, until it seemed the whole of Salem was holding its breath, listening for the next cry. Fear works quietly at first. It slips into the mind like cold air through a crack in the wall. Soon it fills the room and reason begins to fade like smoke in the wind. So it was in Salem. From the lips of the girls came names, simple names, familiar ones. A neighbor, a midwife.
A woman who lived by the forest's edge.
Those names spread faster than the wind itself. Each telling added something new. A strange dream, a missing cow, a whispered curse. What began as a moment of panic grew into a storm that no one could stop. The townspeople began to see signs everywhere. A flickering candle, a sick child, a bird flying at night. All became proof of the devil's hand. Logic dissolved into superstition. Faith, once a comfort, became a blade. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Friends no longer met each other's eyes. Old grudges resurfaced. Land disputes, whispered jealousies, words spoken years before, now returned, twisted into holy evidence. Loyalty was measured not by truth, but by how quickly one condemned another. Men who had shared the same pews on Sunday now stood in opposite corners of the meeting house, accusing, defending, doubting. Women who had cared for each other's children now refused to speak. The air itself seemed to tremble with unease,
as though the village had forgotten how to breathe.
There was no proof, only whispers and fear. Each accusation birthed another until the line between the innocent and the guilty vanished. Even silence became dangerous. To question the accusers was to invite suspicion. To remain neutral was to risk being named. The courts filled with frightened faces. Some confessed to things they had never done, hoping mercy might spare them. Others stood firm, denying the lies even as the rope waited. And still the list grew longer. The ministers prayed. The magistrates wrote.
The girls continued to cry out.
The village moved as one body now, driven not by faith, but by terror, wearing faith's disguise. At night, the wind carried the sound of prayers and weeping through the narrow streets. Fires burned low in hearths left unattended.
children slept uneasy.
Mothers whispered blessings over them, and fathers watched the door, wondering whose name would be spoken next. This was how Salem turned upon itself. Slowly, quietly, as if by its own breath. The fear needed no leader, no command. It fed on itself, growing stronger in the silence between heartbeats. By spring, the village had changed beyond recognition. Every face held a question, every word was measured, and beneath the snow that melted into the muddy streets, something sacred had been lost, the trust that once bound a community together. It had begun with a whisper, but whispers, when believed, can become storms. And in Salem, that storm had already taken root. An invisible fire burning in the hearts of those who could no longer tell truth from fear.
The trials. Justice in darkness.
By the time spring turned to summer, Salem had become a place of trials. The meeting house, once filled with hymns and sermons, was now heavy with fear and the smell of candle smoke. Wooden benches lined the walls. The air hung still, as though waiting to hear what no one dared to speak.
Nearly 200 people had been accused.
Men and women from every part of the village, farmers, midwives, ministers' wives, even children. They were brought before the court, their wrists bound with rope, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights. The judges sat high above them, robes dark against the pale light from the windows. Between them stood the Bible and a trembling belief that they were doing God's work. They asked questions that had no answers, and from the gallery came the cries of the afflicted, their voices rising like a storm. Some fell to the floor, their bodies shaking as they claimed to see invisible spirits. Pressing against them, clawing, choking, every gesture became evidence, every denial, another sign of guilt. There was no proof, only whispers, and the haunting phrase repeated again and again, "The devil made me do it." Those accused spoke of dreams and shadows. The court listened to them as if to scripture. They believed that the unseen could be judged by sight, that fear could be measured like sin. And so the line between truth and imagination dissolved beneath the weight of prayer. As the weeks passed, the trials grew more certain, more practiced. Each name read aloud echoed through the hall, like the tolling of a distant bell. When the verdicts came, they were spoken softly in voices that believed they were saving souls. Outside, the wind carried the sound of the gavel, like thunder over frozen earth. 19 were hanged, their bodies left swaying against the grey sky. One, Giles Corey, was pressed beneath heavy stones for refusing to confess. He spoke no curse, no plea. Only the words, "more weight." And still the stones were added, until his breath became silence. The church bells rang after each execution. Prayers were said for the condemned, and for those who had judged them. It was all done beneath the cross, in the name of mercy, in the name of God. Yet beneath the surface, doubt began to stir. Quietly, like water under ice. Some wondered how truth could live where compassion had died. But the trials continued, driven by momentum, by fear, by the belief that they were purifying the village. The people of Salem moved through their days
as though walking through fog,
half awake, half blind. The sound of the bell and the whisper of prayers merged into a single note, low and endless,
and in that sound lived both faith and guilt,
interwoven so tightly that no one could tell them apart. The awakening, shame and repentance. When the fever of fear finally cooled, the village fell silent. The bells that once rang for judgment now hung motionless above empty streets. The wind carried no screams, only the slow, uncertain rhythm of life returning. It was autumn now in Salem, and the leaves fell softly over the ground. Where the gallows had once cast its shadow, people began to look at one another again, hesitantly, with eyes that no longer held accusation, but carried the weight of remembrance.
The fires that had burned in their hearts
Were now little more than ash. No one could say when the madness had truly ended. It had not stopped with a declaration, but faded slowly like mist lifting from a field at dawn. When the fever of fear cooled, the townspeople awoke in shame.
It was not the shame of crime,
but of blindness. The realization that they had seen only what fear allowed. The ministers spoke of forgiveness, and the magistrates spoke of error, and the colony itself began to tremble under the weight of what it had done. Some tried to make amends. The government declared the trials unlawful.
Compensation was offered to the families of the dead.
Apologies were written, prayers were said, and names were cleared from the record. But paper cannot mend silence. Money cannot restore breath. The gallows had already taken what could not be returned. In the meeting house, where verdicts had once echoed like thunder, there was now only stillness. Men sat with bowed heads. Women wept quietly, their grief no longer for witches, but for neighbors, for friends, for themselves. The church bell rang one last time that year. Not for execution, but for remembrance. Its tone was softer, deeper, as if the metal itself felt sorrow. As snow began to fall again, the village carried on, changed but not healed. Children grew fields thawed, and new sermons were preached, not of sin, but of humility. Yet even as time moved forward, the air in Salem never felt the same. It held something fragile, like a breath caught between apology and prayer, a quiet promise that such darkness would never be allowed to rise again. The lesson, the echo of Salem. Even now, the name Salem lingers like an echo in the wind. It drifts through time, not as a curse, but as a quiet prayer, for reason, for mercy, for the courage to doubt our own fear. Centuries have passed since that bitter winter, yet the village remains in the world's memory, its story retold whenever fear grows louder than truth. The gallows are gone, the fields are green again, but beneath the soil lies something that does not fade. The reminder of what people can do when they mistake belief for justice and fear for faith. Salem became more than a place. It became a mirror. It reflects the danger of the human heart, when certainty blinds compassion,
when judgment becomes a weapon,
and when silence allows shadows to speak in our stead. The lesson it leaves behind is not a cry of guilt, but a whisper of awareness. It asks each generation to listen,
to question,
to pause before it condemns. For every time we believe without proof, every time we surrender thought to fear, a small part of Salem awakens again. There are no more trials, no more gallows,
but the same patterns remain.
In suspicion, in rumor, in the ease with which one voice can turn a crowd. The story reminds us that reason and mercy are not opposites, but companions. One must guide the other, or both are lost. As evening falls upon the memory of that distant village, the last sound is that of a bell, soft, measured, ringing not for the dead, but for the living. It carries across quiet fields and sleeping houses a single tone woven with both sorrow and hope. Then comes the silence. It settles gently, as if to say the story is finished, but its meaning still breathes. In that stillness lies the true echo of Salem, a reminder that wisdom begins, not in fear, but in understanding. And so the bell fades,
The air grows still,
and the world listens, just long enough to remember what must never be forgotten. Epilogue, the echo of history. Soft piano notes drift through the air, slow as a heartbeat, calm as breath. The music folds over time itself, gathering fragments of lives once lived. From the golden halls of England, where a queen stood alone beneath her crown, to the humid jungles where cacao trees whispered to the gods. From the long, weary trails where footsteps faded into silence, to the dim courtrooms of Salem, where belief and fear became one. History moves through each of these places, quiet and unseen,
like a pulse beneath the skin of the world. It does not end.
It lingers, shaping what we remember and what we choose to forget. Every story of power and loss, of discovery and regret, is only another reflection.
In the endless mirror of time, we look into it
and see both the past and ourselves. So as you drift towards sleep, let these voices fade gently into stillness. Let the echoes settle in the quiet corners of your mind. There is no need to hold them, for they are already part of you.
woven into the rhythm of every breath, every heartbeat.
And if you listen closely, you may still hear them. Soft, distant, the timeless whisper of humanity, reminding us that the past is never gone,
Only resting, waiting to be remembered again. Good night.